Bloomberg Audio Studios.
Podcasts, radio, news.
You're listening to the Bloomberg Balance of Power podcast. Catch us live weekdays at noon Eastern on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. Listen on demand wherever you get your podcasts or watch us live on YouTube.
Welcome to the Thursday edition of Balance of Power. Yeah, you made it to Little Friday. And it's a big day around here in Washington. Anytime there's a state dinner, there's just something in the air. The sense of celebration, I guess, at the White House. And if you're inside the grounds of the White House, this is a spectacular moment because they bring all the tables outside of the extended kitchen. You got people, temporary workers, setting up stages. They're putting up the tenting on the South Lawn. This is a big deal. It doesn't happen that often, and it doesn't happen for everyone. Take a look at all the world leaders who have come here since Joe Biden was in the White House and how many did not get this treatment. But the president of Kenya is an exception, with the world watching and namely China watching, as its Belt and Road Initiative across Africa runs into a wall. And African nations like Kenya are coming to the U.S. to have a conversation about how to rationalize their debt and how to draw Western investment into the country. So this is important. The president of Kenya, William Ruto, we talked about this yesterday, arrived at the White House a little while ago inside a bilateral meeting with the president of the United States right now. And at 12:30, supposedly, according to the schedule, that's a half an hour from now, there will be a joint news conference. We will bring that to you live with American reporters and foreign press there, having a conversation with these two leaders. And, of course, that conversation can go in a lot of different directions. The fact is, though, this marks 60 years of diplomatic relations between our two countries as the White House tries to leverage the private sector to deepen ties. And that's why I want to bring in Tyler Kendall, Bloomberg's Tyler Kendall at the White House on the North Lawn right now with the story of what's happening inside that building behind her. Hey, Kendall. Hey, Tyler.
Yeah, hey, Joe. Hey, Joe. It was interesting to see that President Biden decided to kick off this state visit by inviting executives from both U.S. and Kenyan-based companies to the White House. That included the CFO of Google's parent company, Alphabet. It's part of this broader push for more strategic investment in the country. And I want you to take a listen to President Biden from earlier, talking about this renewed relationship between Silicon Valley and what's being called the Silicon Savannah. Take a listen.
We're launching a new era of technological cooperation between Kenya and America, including new exchanges and investments in key fields of cybersecurity, artificial intelligence, and semiconductors.
It's a welcome sentiment for the Kenyan President William Ruto and appears to already be paying off. Today, Kenya announced a $3.6 billion infrastructure investment. This will build highways across the country, and it's backed by a Virginia-based fund known as Everstrong Capital. Joe, as you alluded to, this is part of broader competition on the continent for investment between U.S. and China. Interestingly enough, we dug into the data and looked at an analysis done by Johns Hopkins, looking at government data, which found that China is far outpacing the U.S. when it comes to foreign direct investment in China. And that started in 2013, which happens to be the same year that China launched its Belt and Road Initiative. But Joe, when we look just at Kenya, which is why we are here today, Kenya, when it comes to foreign direct investment by the U.S. into Kenya, it's actually declining. The most recent data is from 2022 from the USTR's office, and it shows levels were at $277 million. Joe, that's a 10% decrease from the year prior.
Oh, that's fascinating. Great homework. For a little perspective here before we hear these two gentlemen at their respective podium here, Tyler, this is a conversation with the private sector that took place yesterday. There were executives from Alphabet, from capital investment firms. You just mentioned a deal with a Northern Virginia company here that's coming to bear. It's kind of interesting to see the form that this is taking. And tonight it's about soft power, right? They're all going to get into this tent for a big dinner, a big celebration. We've had a look at the menu. It looks like a pretty posh night.
Right, exactly. But before all of that could happen, we know that the Kenyan President William Ruto was really looking for some of these more concrete proposals coming out of this. He traveled to Capitol Hill yesterday to meet with House Speaker Mike Johnson, where he made clear that the economic proposals and also trade and also this idea of debt, which I know that you're going to get into later in the show today, would be addressed during these meetings.
That's great. Tyler Kendall on the North Lawn. Come back to us as we get closer to the news conference, Tyler, with a lot to talk about here today in Washington, D.C. We'll be hearing, as I mentioned, from the presidents, both of them, in a joint news conference from the White House a short time from now. We'll bring that to you live when it happens. Let's add the voice of Bloomberg White House correspondent Jordan Fabian with us as we look ahead to this news conference here on Balance of Power. Jordan, it's great to have you. There are going to be American reporters there who have things other than Africa and foreign investment on their mind. What's going to be the pressing issue to get to Joe Biden today?
As important as Joe Biden views this visit today, the issue that's been dominating his presidency is the Israel-Hamas war. And I would expect this is going to come up at the joint news conference later. There are a number of other topics that are on his plate, from immigration to Donald Trump, the ongoing trials in the election, that he could be asked about at that news conference at 12:30. So a lot of topics could be covered.
I have no doubt. The significance of this meeting is really something to me, because not every world leader, as you can express to us here and explain to us, Jordan, gets this kind of treatment. Why is the president of Kenya being propped up on this level today on the international stage?
Yeah, it's a good point, Joe. This is the first state visit for an African leader in 16 years to the White House. And it really goes to show how this great power competition between the U.S. and China is heating up. This is almost becoming a Cold War light, where they're vying for power and influence all over the globe. And look, the U.S. has been concerned about China's inroads in Africa, not only to get critical minerals, natural resources, but also these infrastructure investments that the U.S. says is saddling these countries with debt. But the African countries have said, look, the U.S. has neglected the region for a long time. What's the alternative? This is Joe Biden's attempt at that alternative, trying to inject U.S. foreign investment there on semiconductors, on infrastructure, as Tyler just mentioned, to try and edge China out of that space. And it's going to, they have a lot of work to do. So we'll see if it succeeds. But this is a big swing in that direction.
It sure is. I know this is probably not the type of thing that resonates at home, Jordan, when you consider the candidate Joe Biden, as opposed to the president of the United States doing his job in this case. Or maybe there's a broader way to look at it. We hear a lot about the Rose Garden strategy. These moments help Joe Biden no matter what, correct? Being caught in the act of doing the job.
Exactly. It's the power of incumbency. It's a very powerful force in American politics. Donald Trump is the only incumbent since 1992 to lose re-election. So this is something that incumbents do. They fly around the country on Air Force One. They hold state dinners and news conferences in the Rose Garden to project that power. And so this is an example of that today. And it also, again, gives President Biden a chance to hit on some of these key issues. We talked about China. Also, Joe Biden's bleeding support from black voters. He can now go out there and say, hey, I have invited this African leader here. I'm showing the importance of this relationship. Oh, and by the way, a lot of Black American celebrities, business leaders, et cetera, are expected to be at that state dinner tonight. So even more soft power on display.
Look at that. Absolutely. I'm so glad you said that. Think of the optics that'll be shared with the country and with the world tomorrow. None of this stuff happens by accident. Jordan, are we taking dibs on when this starts? It's scheduled for 12:30. There's no way that happens coming directly out of a bilateral meeting in the Oval Office, right?
If it's a day that ends in Y, we're running on Biden time. So I would imagine it's going to be late.
This is a man who lives and dies by the Biden clock. Thank you, Jordan. Great to see you. Always a pleasure. Jordan Fabian, one of the best here at Bloomberg and covering the White House for us. We'll bring that to you when it happens. Hey, look, maybe they show up early. I dare to dream. You'll hear about it live. And you can see it live, too. To that end, I invite you to join us on YouTube. Go to YouTube and search Bloomberg Global News. You'll find our live stream right there. We always save a seat for you in the studio if it is a day ending in Y. As we turn our attention to something that actually got done this week on Capitol Hill. Enough complaining about messaging bills for at least a moment here, because the crypto market structure bill passed. This is the one we talked about quite a bit with lawmakers, including Wiley. The FIT bill, as they call it, Fit 21, market structure, who handles what coin and in which way. The question is, where does it go from here? And I'm glad to say he's come back to talk to us in what I bet feels like a bit of a victory lap for Wiley Nickel, the gentleman from North Carolina's 13th district, of course, Democrat, a pro-crypto Democrat. It's good to see you, sir. Welcome back. Is this going to see the light of day? Could it pass the Senate?
Well, hey, it's great to be with you. This is a big deal. This is what Washington looks like when we're getting things done, when we're working across the aisle. It's a victory for bipartisan governance. And for the first time in our nation's history, we have voted on crypto regulation to regulate the industry and do the things we need to do to protect consumers, stop the next FTX. Great bipartisan showing of support yesterday in the House.
We had the head of the Blockchain Association with us at the table here yesterday, who was on her way to a party after the program because of the moment that you just framed. But how do you make it more than a messaging meal? By the way, I realize this is a big deal for the industry. A couple of years ago, this moment probably could not have been envisioned, but you want to get it across the finish line, right?
No, this was over a year, hundreds and hundreds of hours of work with our Republican colleagues to get this bill to a place where we could get 71 Democrats behind it. And by the way, I saw her at that party afterwards, so I know she made it. This has been a bipartisan process. My fellow North Carolinian Republican chair of our committee, Patrick McHenry, sat down immediately with Democrats like me who wanted to work on this issue and said, listen, we're going to do this together. We brought in our changes. We brought in, for this bill to get it to this point. And, 71 Democrats is a big deal. This is more than we thought we could get, but you just got to talk to folks, educate them on the issues. And if you educate folks on the issues about why we need to keep innovation in the U.S., why we need to protect consumers and regulate the industry, we got a lot of great folks on board, including people like Speaker Nancy Pelosi. So a great win yesterday.
Well, it sounds like we're going to have another pretty important development today with the potential for an Ether ETF being approved. How important is that in the normalization? You talk about the education of people here, and that you're right, that it tends to be, and I'm not sitting here with a position on this, but it tends to be the more people learn about crypto, the more, in some cases, they are drawn to it. If that's the case, you see headlines like today, it's not just Bitcoin, it's Ether. This is part of the industrial investment space. Does that unlock opportunities on Capitol Hill or demand solutions on Capitol Hill?
I can just tell you on Ether, that's a place where the SEC, after we pushed, allowed for a Bitcoin ETF, and they ought to use the same rules and rationale to approve the Ether ETF. I pushed, with Democrat Josh Gottheimer, Chair Patrick McHenry, in a letter just yesterday to Gary Gensler, urging him to approve the Ether ETF. But these are good products. This is a place that is safe for consumers and a way that gives them the opportunity to invest in these products. So I think it's a good thing, and I'm hopeful that we'll have good news from the SEC. But in general, we're seeing regulation by enforcement that is not helping President Biden. And I think the SEC generally is out of step with the rest of the Biden administration on a lot of these issues. So the SEC is not the only voice, the only person at the table here.
We've mentioned before that you're ending your tenure, at least for now, in Congress. And as someone who has the freedom to speak, not running for re-election, and I realize that you may well be back in the political sphere at some point soon, has your office become a refuge for other lawmakers who can come there and say whatever they want?
There's a ton of freedom in this. You get to do the things that I care about in a bipartisan way. If I think the Democrats are right, I'm with my Democrats. If the Republicans have a good point, I get to work with them on issues. So, that's been great. But, for me, it's just about getting 4 years of work done in 2 years. So we are literally, racing to get to the finish line to do as much as we can. And, people who send us to Washington, they expect us to work and get things done. And I just grasp for any opportunity to move legislation that can get through the House and Senate, get signed by the president, and help the people I'm here to serve.
all while honoring the Grateful Dead. That is Wiley Nickel. I thought of you when I saw the images from the Sphere, Congressman. My God, I have to be there for the next one. Thanks for coming back, and don't be a stranger while you're in town. Wiley Nickel, the Democrat from North Carolina.
You're listening to the Bloomberg Balance of Power podcast. Catch us live weekdays at noon Eastern on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. You can also listen live on Amazon Alexa from our flagship New York station. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130.
We add the voice of an expert. Robin Sanders, former U.S. ambassador to the Congo under George W. Bush, to Nigeria under George Bush and Barack Obama, former director for Africa at the National Security Council, now a member of the board of Human Rights Watch. Madam Ambassador, it's great to have you on Bloomberg. What do you want to hear from Joe Biden when he speaks today?
I think that there's a scene setter here that I want to actually talk about first. This is the first African president state visit since 2008. That should really set the tone for how important this is. The fact that Kenya has been chosen for this really underscores the role that Kenya is playing on the continent, and that Kenya also playing a more global leading role, particularly with the announcement today that it will be a non-NATO security partner for the U.S. So this is a big deal. It's a pivot for us in a big way that we needed to make. We are behind the curve in terms of our engagement with Africa on a consistent level. We're seen as being episodic, only coming to the region when we need something. And I think this message that we hear you, we see you as an equal partner and a strategic partner that Biden is doing during this visit is extremely important.
If you're with us on Bloomberg TV, you see the East Room at the White House decked out and ready for these two leaders. When they speak, we'll bring the conversation with you. And Madam Ambassador, I'll apologize in advance if our conversation is interrupted. There are a lot of audiences for the event that you just described, and China is one of them. To the extent that countries like Kenya have been left carrying heavy debt loads as a byproduct of the Belt and Road Initiative in China, what can the U.S. do to help? Is it through private enterprise, private investment, as this administration is saying, or does the government need to help here as well?
All of those combined, vis-a-vis China, we are behind the curve. In this visit, though, you'll see that we're focused on a number of things. There was a business roundtable that was held at the White House as well. There's a $1 billion deal on the table with Microsoft. You had visits to Coca-Cola. You had a state visit. Also, he went to Atlanta and met with business leaders there. And so it is a very multifaceted thematic trip. It is not only the security message, it's not only the democracy message, but it is the trade and investment message. American businesses want to trade with a country like Kenya because of its history of democracy, and we need to step up as the U.S. government to do more. You'll see that Prosper Africa, all the government agencies on the development and business side are very much involved in this visit, and they're excited about it from a trade perspective, from a foreign direct investment perspective. So all of those things are playing in this visit. And for those of us who worked on Africa for years, we see this as a big plus, not only for the U.S., but for the image that the U.S. is really getting it, that they need to be involved with Africa in a much more deep and comprehensive way.
Does Joe Biden need to go there now?
I think so. He had mentioned it earlier in his tenure. I know things on the ground in the world have changed so drastically, so I don't know whether that will happen between now and November. Realistically, I get that. But the fact that this state visit, I said, when you look at the time period, 2000 time where generations have come into leadership on the continent, not only just in business, but in politics. And we've been left out of that because we haven't shown the consistency that China has. And whatever criticisms that you have about China in terms of debt, those are true, but China can pivot faster than we can, and they have understood that, and they are trying to address that. But the other thing that I will say that China has had an annual meeting with African heads of state the 1990s, since at the end of the 1990s. And so you have this longevity there of consistency, including the foreign minister, which would be the equivalent of Secretary Blinken, going to the continent every single year at the beginning of the year without fail for all of that period of time. So we haven't shown this consistent engagement. And I think that I can't tell you how important this visit is. It sends so many messages in the right direction. And I really commend the administration for moving in that direction in such a high level way.
Well, it is pretty amazing. We remember the investments that George W. Bush made as a Republican president. You were there for it as ambassador to the Congo. And there's been a bit of an interruption. To your point, it's been 16 years. How long will it be before there's another?
Well, I'm hoping that this is a wake-up call overall that, Africa is here. It will have the largest population in the world and collectively, combined, in about a decade out. Right now, it's on track to have the largest working age population combined. That means if you combine the entire rest of the world, the African continent will have the largest working age population in about 10 years. And so when I I talk to students and people interested in Africa, even from the American perspective, where do you think your markets are going to be? Who do you think your local and economic leaders are going to be? Where they're going to be? They're going to be on the continent, and they're starting now, and you see that now. And it's commendable that the Biden administration has recognized that. And I mentioned earlier that President Ruto had done a stop in Atlanta. I thought that was fantastic. He went to Spelman to highlight, educational ties. There's a climate change portion of the visit. I already mentioned the business and trade aspect. He went to the creative industries of Perry Tyler to show you just how important digital Africa and the United States, and of course the history there. President Ruto also had a visit to the Hill. He met with Speaker Johnson. He met with Minority Leader Jeffries. Met with the Congressional Black Caucus leaders. And so this is a comprehensive visit. It was well thought out, very detailed. It doesn't mean that there aren't challenges on the line. I also want to add the security portion to this. The fact that the president has announced that Kenya will be a non-NATO security partner, we've never done that on the continent before in such an official way. We're episodic about that. We'll choose a particular issue in a particular country to latch on security-wise, but to designate an entire country and that lead as a security partner at the as close to the NATO level as you can get, I think is unique. And then Kenya, of course, as you know, is going to be leading this multinational force to Haiti. And so all of that, its role in the region, its role in trying to turn its economics around, its leadership on climate change in the region, its leadership not only in East Africa, but the continent writ large, and all the other things that I mentioned in terms of trade and business ties are just fundamental and very important.
She spent time serving as U.S. ambassador to Nigeria and the Congo. Former Ambassador Robin Sanders. We really appreciate the insights.
You're listening to the Bloomberg Balance of Power podcast. Catch us live weekdays at noon Eastern on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. Listen on demand wherever you get your podcasts or watch us live on YouTube.
We assemble our panel now with an eye on the campaign trail. Remembering, of course, Joe Biden here, the trappings of the White House. That's the whole point of this, right? Caught in the act of presidenting. He's not on the campaign trail today. He's got the one thing that no one else can do when they're running, and that is actually being on the stage at the White House. All the while, Donald Trump's world rocked by Nikki Haley. And I'm not about to tell you another story here about a protest vote in a primary state. She says she's going to vote Trump. Nikki Haley talking in Washington at the Hudson Institute yesterday. Before we assemble the panel, here's what she said.
Biden has been a catastrophe. So I will be voting for Trump. Trump would be smart to reach out to the millions of people who voted for me and continue to support me and not assume that they're just going to be with him. And I genuinely hope he does that.
Okay. Well, that's not an endorsement. Or is it? A half endorsement. She's going to vote for him, but he's still got to work for the votes of her supporters, many of whom have stood by her through a primary season that did not even include her active campaign. Jeannie Shanzano is with us, Bloomberg Politics contributor and now senior democracy fellow with the Center for the Study of the Presidency and Congress, alongside Republican strategist Chapin Fay, managing director at Actum. Great to see both of you here. Help me understand what's going on, Chapin, inside the Republican Party. Is it enough, or doesn't it even matter for Nikki Haley to say she's voting Trump? Why not the full endorsement? Why the half measure?
Well, I think it does matter. I think it's a signal to her voters that they can vote for Trump. And I think she still wants to see him do some of the right things on her, particular policy positions and in general in the campaign. But it is certainly an endorsement of Trump. Anyone saying they're going to vote for them is an endorsement. I think it matters just a little bit. I think she brings some voters to the table, though, Trump was handily winning all of these primary votes, not much contest, but he's been winning them handily. And in some cases, in a lot of cases, combined, he receives more votes than all the other ones on the ballot combined. So it almost doesn't matter a whole terrible lot if he loses all of Nikki Haley's voters. But it's certainly, as they fight around the margins for the independent voters, those voters are certainly ones Trump is going to need to bank.
Yeah, I wonder your thoughts on this, Jeannie, and to the extent to which they could either stay home or actually vote for the Democrat in this case. Let's not confuse ourselves. Nikki Haley was and is a very conservative Republican. And she said something really interesting yesterday. I'd like to give you both a chance to react to this. Because, yes, she's going to vote for Donald Trump. And, yes, she said Joe Biden's a catastrophe. But here's what else she said. Quote, "A loud part of each party wants us to abandon our allies, appease our enemies, and focus only on the problems we have at home. This worldview has already put America in great danger, and the threat is mounting by the day," unquote. That's not an endorsement of Donald Trump's worldview, Jeannie. Who's she talking to?
Yeah, first of all, I think we need a new word for, lukewarm, tepid, to your point, sort of like a half endorsement. I kept feeling like there should be like a cartoon bubble over her head saying, I'm only doing this because I want a future in the party. I mean, Chris Christie knew this was coming. That's why he said he wouldn't endorse her, because he knew she would endorse Donald Trump in the end. And she has. And to your point, her list, I wrote them down, of priorities she looks for in a president: has the back of allies, is going to secure the border, supports freedom, and of course understands the need for less debt. In every single one of those issues, she criticized, viciously Donald Trump on those. On the allies, she criticized him for saying not only wouldn't he have the back of our NATO allies, but he'd encourage Russia to attack them. That was in February. In the debate, she said Donald Trump ran up $8 trillion in debt. So I can't answer, to your point, who she is talking to, and her sort of lukewarm, I'll vote for him, but you guys make up your own mind. This is a big problem for Republicans. You've got closed primaries with 1/5 of voters going out to vote for somebody who has no chance of winning. And Nikki Haley, whether it's Indiana and, up and down these states in the last few months, and she dropped out. So big problem. I don't see this as much of an endorsement. I see it as her trying to hang on to a role in the party when Donald Trump is shown the door at some point or the other.
Well, and I suspect that she will have one, Chapin. I'm guessing that you do too. But her take on Donald Trump's protectionist view, and she does refer to a loud part of each party, she said in this quote, is speaking to whom? Or is she simply out of step with the modern Republican Party?
Well, I think certainly her presidential efforts shows that she's not fully in step with the current Republican Party. So, I think that is an issue. I would note, though, I think one of the things, the point she's making is on national security. If you just compare where we are now from where we were 4 years ago, I mean, and we can have a debate about whether Joe Biden is to blame at all or fully or what for this, but the world and the country is just much more dangerous. And the incumbent gets tagged with that, no matter whether he's responsible, he or she is responsible, right? So Joe Biden is presiding over a country in a world where there are multiple wars on multiple fronts. Over the southern border, people are pouring over. Things are getting worse. And I think a lot of people, including Nikki Haley, are wondering, like, what is the plan here? No one, he on the border, there's just nothing happening, right? And the national security state status in this country is much worse than it was. We are less secure, less safe than we were 4 years ago. So I think that's what she was, the UN ambassador. This is something she cares a lot about. This is something in her wheelhouse. This is something that she has a voice on. So I think you're going to hear more from her on these particular topics in particular as the campaign goes. And I would also just point out, the tepid endorsement, I will vote for him, but he has to earn the vote. That's a way for her to have a voice also during the campaign, right? That's a way for her to keep talking about the things she wants to talk about and pushing former President Trump to the right place in her eyes.
You think, Chapin, she gets a speaking role at the convention?
It's such a hard guessing game to play with Donald Trump. It's hard to tell if he has, if she successfully got under his skin and it's a no, or like many others who have tried and failed to take him on, they get put into the collection, of speakers and cabinet members and stuff. So I think there's a possibility. I'm not sure President Trump wants anyone who ran against him to really have a huge platform there, but you never know. I mean, the other side of that coin is that it always feels nice for someone to have lost to you and then to hear them, publicly endorse you in a speech to the entire country. So, who knows? I think it's 50-50.
Well, I'll tell you, I remember that Ted Cruz speech, boy, that didn't go over the way they expected it to. You don't think Nikki Haley shows up? How about Mike Pence, Jeannie? Is he going to speak at the convention?
I would doubt it. I think we have to put Mike Pence, Liz Cheney. They said they wouldn't support him. I doubt they'll be there. Donald Trump, as came out and said, not only isn't she going to have any sort of role as vice president or anything else, he doesn't want her supporters. She's banned. He'll win without them. Who knows? He could flip on that, in the next day. But I do think this shows an enormous division in the Republican Party that we don't talk a lot about. I mean, we talk about the division in the Democratic Party, and Lord knows it's there. But on the Republican side, somebody pointed out, and I think it's important to say, when you're looking at somebody like Larry Hogan, this more traditional Republican in the Maryland primary, he gets 67%. That shows you that there are MAGA voters in Maryland who are not going to come out for him. And just similarly, there are traditional, quote unquote, Republicans that are going out for him. And that is across the board. That's why she continues long after she's dropped out of the race. You see people coming out and saying, I know she can't win. She's not even in this thing anymore. But you know what? I'm going to take a stand and cast my vote for her in a closed primary. So there is a division there, and it probably won't be addressed this go around or at the Republican convention. But boy, it's there, and it is going to crop up, and somebody should be there to take advantage of it when Donald Trump takes a step aside at some point.
Well, let me just take the opportunity to put a little fear up the spine of politicos across the Capitol here, and even in New York, where you are, Jeannie. The great fear expressed in the newest polling by Marquette Law School general election, if it were held today, Trump versus Biden, 50-50, it's a tie. This is the stuff that keeps people up at night, Chapin Fay. Recounts, or maybe even going to the House of Representatives to decide the outcome.
Look, no matter what happens, I think it's pretty clear that it's going to be, if it's close, it's going to be pretty nasty and problematic, right? And it does keep me up. And I think both both parties need to act, in accordance. This country really isn't set up for 50-50 type results. It's very difficult, particularly in a presidential race, as we have seen, pretty much this entire century, that, a very close race is going to put a deep strain on Americans and our institutions that are already under strain. The left and the right have different ideas of why they're under strain, but I think we can all agree that, they are under some stress right now. And, listen, there's a chance I don't think it's a high chance, but there's a chance President Trump is convicted in a criminal court and sentenced to prison and still elected to the presidency. So that in and of itself is going to be a constitutional crisis like we have never experienced. That we're laughing, but it is kind of scary, like you said.
This is the madhouse we're living in right now, Jeannie. With our minute left, it brings us back full circle now to our Bloomberg swing state poll yesterday. This is why half the electorate in the swing states fears violence around the election.
That's right. And can you imagine if this thing gets thrown to the House? It's one vote per state delegation. This is not a House that is controlled by the Republicans by more than just a smidgen at this point. So those battles with those state delegation votes alone would be, enormous. You just can't wrap your head around. We feared this in 16 and 20. It could come to fruition this time. And Joe, I'm just going to say, since I'm on a kick for constitutional reform these days, let's reconsider the Electoral College while I try to pack the Supreme Court.
God.
I know it's not going to happen, but it may be time to have a conversation.
After November, what the heck? I love it. We have to have this conversation. Absolutely. And that's why it's great to have Jeannie Shanzano and Chapin Fay, our great panel today. Thanks for listening to the Balance of Power podcast. Make sure to subscribe if you haven't already at Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. And you can find us live every weekday from Washington, D.C. at noontime Eastern at Bloomberg.com.